The letter arrived in a thick, cream-colored envelope that smelled faintly of lavender and old money. Elias Thorne, a freelance graphic designer living in a cramped studio apartment in Seattle, didn't know he had an Uncle Silas until the day the executor of the estate called. Silas Thorne had been a recluse, a man who had bought 3,200 acres of pristine wilderness in the Montana, high country decades ago, long before the developers had circled like vultures. It's called Blackwood Lake. The lawyer had told him over a crackling phone line. And Elias, it's not just land, it's a legacy. But be careful. The neighbors have been waiting for your uncle to pass for a long time. When Elias finally drove through the wrought iron gates of the Highland Crest Estates to reach his new home, he felt the immediate shift in atmosphere. His rusted hatchback looked like a blemish against the manicured lawns and the faux Tuscan villas that lined the paved road leading up to the mountains. What Elias didn't realize was that, while his uncle owned the massive lake and the surrounding forest, the 3,200-acre heart of the valley, a luxury housing development had sprouted up right against his northern border, wrapping around the lake like a gold-plated noose. He pulled up to the main ranch house, a sprawling structure of heavy timber and stone that overlooked the crystal-blue expanse of Blackwood Lake. It was breathtaking. But before he could even turn off the engine, a white golf cart zipped up behind him, tires crunching aggressively on the gravel. A woman with a rigid posture and hair sprayed into a structural marvel stepped out. She held a clipboard like a shield and wore a blazer that cost more than Elias's car. "You must be the nephew," she said, her voice like a sharpening stone. "I'm Margaret Vance, president of the Highland Crest Homeowners Association. We've been waiting for Silas to vacate. We have a list of violations that need immediate attention now that the property is under new management." Elias blinked, stepping out into the crisp mountain air. "Violations? I just got here, and I'm pretty sure this ranch isn't part of your development. My uncle bought this in the 70s. Margaret offered a thin, predatory smile. "Oh dear." Silas signed the perimeter agreement 20 years ago to gain access to the paved main road and utility lines. "You are technically an associate. Member of the HOA. That means you're subject to the aesthetic harmony guidelines. We've been lenient with your uncle due to his age, but that leniency has expired." She handed him a packet. It was 40 pages long, detailing everything from the unauthorized shade of brown on his barn to the excessive height of the natural grass near the shoreline. Elias realized then that this wasn't just a welcome committee. It was a declaration of war. Over the next month, Elias tried to find peace. He fell in love with the lake, spending his mornings watching the mist rise off the water, and his evenings listening to the haunting call of the loons. He met Sarah, a local conservationist, who helped him understand the delicate ecosystem of the ranch. She warned him that the HOA had been eyeing the lake for years, wanting to turn it into a private recreational club with concrete docks and jet skis. The harassment began in earnest during the second month. Elias received a fine of $500 because his ranch house was weathered cedar instead of desert sandstone, the only approved color palette. Then came a $1,000 fine for unauthorized biomatter, otherwise known as the wildflower meadow he refused to mow. Margaret and her board members would drive their golf carts to the edge of his property line, pointing and taking photos as if he were running a junkyard instead of preserving a forest. The conflict reached a breaking point during a Friday night board meeting. Elias attended hoping to appeal the fines. The community center was filled with wealthy homeowners who looked at Elias like he was a stain on their silk rugs. Margaret stood at the podium basking in her perceived power. "Mr. Thorne," Margaret said, her voice echoing, "the board has voted. Under Section 4.2 of the Harmony Act, we are declaring your lakefront a nuisance. The tall grass is attracting vermin, by which we mean deer and elk, and the fallen timber in the water is an eyesore. We have contracted a landscaping crew to enter the property Monday morning to clear-cut the shoreline and install a sod lawn. The cost will be $45,000, billed to your estate as a lien. If you cannot pay, we will move toward foreclosure." The room cheered. Elias stood up, his heart hammering against his ribs. "You can't just come onto my land and strip mine the habitat. That lake is a sanctuary. It's been wild for 100 years. We can and we will Margaret replied, her eyes glinting. The agreement Silas signed gives us aesthetic oversight over all visible borders. And since your ranch is visible from every mansion on the hill, we own the view. You're outnumbered, Mr. Thorne. This isn't the Wild West anymore. It's Highland Crest. Elias left the meeting in a daze, but as he drove back to the ranch, his shock turned into a cold, hard resolve. He spent the entire weekend in his uncle's dusty library, digging through crates of old maps, legal ledgers, and property deeds. He wasn't looking for a way to stop the HOA. He was looking for the why. Why had his uncle, a man who famously hated bureaucracy, ever signed that perimeter agreement? In a leather-bound folder tucked behind a collection of bird-watching journals, Elias found a map that wasn't about the land, but about the water. He spent all Sunday on the phone with a high-powered water rights lawyer in Helena and a surveyor from the state capital. By Monday morning, he was ready. As the sun rose, a fleet of bulldozers and trucks gathered at the gates of the Thorne Ranch. Margaret Vance was there, wearing a brand-new hard hat and holding a ceremonial, ribbon-cutting pair of scissors. She looked like a general ready to conquer a kingdom. Elias met them at the property line. He wasn't holding a protest sign or a shotgun. He was holding a single laminated document and a thermos of coffee. "Move the equipment, Mr. Thorne," Margaret commanded. "We have a court-sanctioned right to abate a nuisance, and we have the sheriff on standby if you interfere." "Actually, Margaret," Elias said, his voice calm and terrifyingly steady, "I've spent the last 48 hours with the State Water Board and the Department of Natural Resources. You see, I was looking at the perimeter agreement Silas signed. You're right, it gives the HOA oversight of the view and the land in exchange for road access. But Silas was a much better chess player than you gave him credit for." He stepped closer, leaning against the gate. "In 1994, he registered this 3,200-acre ranch as a critical watershed protection zone with the state. According to the original deed and the state-mandated watershed map, the Highland Crest Estates, every single one of those $30 million homes, was built on a secondary drainage basin that flows directly into my lake." Margaret scoffed. "So what? That just means you can't build a factory. It doesn't stop us from fixing your eyesore of a shoreline." "It does more than that," Elias continued, a smile finally touching his lips. "To ensure the aesthetic harmony of the water quality, the owner of the Thorne Ranch has the unilateral power to approve or deny any drainage system that might impact the lake's health. I had a water inspector out here at dawn. It turns out the chemical fertilizers you use on your perfect lawns and the runoff from your heated infinity pools are leaking high levels of phosphates into my water. It's a violation of the State Clean Water Act and, more importantly, a violation of the very agreement you've been using to bully me." Margaret's face began to pale. Elias flipped to the second page of his document. "Paragraph 12, subsection B," Elias quoted. "If the associate member's land is endangered by the actions of the primary HOA, the associate member may invoke protective sequestration. In short, Margaret, I'm shutting down your drainage. I'm filing a state injunction to have your sewer lines rerouted away from my basin, a project that will cost your HOA millions. And since your paved roads were built over my private easement, I'm reclaiming the North Access Road as a private wildlife corridor. As of 10 minutes ago, this road is closed to all non-ranch traffic." The overreach didn't just stop. It imploded, because Margaret and the board had been so aggressive in trying to seize Elias's land. They had triggered a series of legal audits they never expected. The state, now alerted to the environmental violations, began issuing daily fines to the HOA. The real bombshell, however, was the road. By reclaiming the North Access Road, the only paved entrance to the community, Elias effectively turned the Highland Crest Estates into a landlocked island. The only other way in was a winding, treacherous dirt track that the county refused to pave. Property values plummeted overnight. People who had bought homes for $5 million were suddenly looking at houses that were legally inaccessible by emergency vehicles or delivery trucks. The HOA board was sued by its own members for negligence and overreach. Margaret Vance was ousted in a landslide vote, but it was too late. The HOA went bankrupt trying to fight the state, the disgruntled homeowners, and Elias all at once. The Highland Crest Estates became a cautionary tale in real estate law. 6 months later, the atmosphere at Blackwood Lake had changed. The golf carts were gone. The constant hum of lawnmowers had been replaced by the sound of the wind through the pines. Many of the homeowners had sold their properties at a massive loss, and the new buyers were different. People who didn't mind a little wildness, who understood that you don't move to the mountains to make them look like a suburban mall. Elias sat on his porch with Sarah, watching a herd of elk graze in the meadow, the same meadow Margaret had called a nuisance. The new, smaller HOA board had signed a peace treaty with Elias in exchange for reopening the road. The development agreed to convert all lawns to native flora and ban all chemical runoff. Elias looked out over the 200 acres. The reeds were tall, the fallen logs provided homes for the trout, and the water was a deep natural emerald. He had inherited more than just land. He had inherited the duty to protect it. The HOA had reached for his shoreline, trying to grab a piece of his peace, and in their greed, they had reached too far. They had tried to unfold the wild, but in the end, it was the HOA that had unfolded, disappearing back into the landscape until only the lake remained, silent and free.